Welcome to the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Our 2020 virtual season is broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
My name is Adrian Harewood from CBC Ottawa, and I'm delighted to be hosting another edition of the Ottawa Writers Festival. Thomas King is one of Canada's most prolific, versatile, and acclaimed artists. He is a novelist, short story writer, script writer, and photographer. He's written over a dozen books of fiction and nonfiction, including Medicine River, Greengrass Running Water, The Back of the Turtle, A Short History of Indians, and The Inconvenient Indian. He is the recipient of the Governor-General's Award for Fiction and the RBC Taylor Prize. Thomas King is a member of the Order of Canada and the recipient of a National Aboriginal Achievement Award. In 2003, he delivered the prestigious Massey Lecture entitled The Truth About Stories, A Native Narrative. His latest novel is called Indians on Vacation, and it's a delight and a privilege for me to welcome Thomas King. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
And congratulations on this latest book of yours. Thomas, many years ago, I had a chance to have a conversation with the Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano, author of course, The Open Veins of Latin America, and he told me that there was this veritable civil war going on inside his head between all the words that wanted to be selected by him, that wanted to be picked by him. These words were constantly fighting to be recognized, fighting to be noticed by him. And I'm wondering if you have the same kind of civil war going on in your head between all the various stories that want to be told.
No, it's more like an Easter egg hunt. I go running around a field not knowing where I'm going, and I stumble across little eggs every so often, and I pick them up and take them home and then sort them and try to figure out what to do with them.
How do you decide which egg to choose? Because there's so many.
It's if I knew how I did that, I would package it and sell it. It just depends on the eggs that I've got there on the table. I really never know what word I'm going to use until I see it on the page, until I hear it out loud. I read all my stuff out loud. I suspect Galeano did the same thing. I got to meet the man down in Uruguay. We went down there just to meet him and have a little chat. It wasn't much of a chat, but it was a great chat. And if I had known about the war in his head, I would have asked him about that over coffee. Who knows? I might have had a completely different insight. So you're a little bit late with that piece of advice, but thank you.
Well, where did this latest egg, or rather, how did this latest egg emerge, Indians on Vacation? Where did this story come from?
Well, I mean, I suppose it starts with the fact that I traveled a great deal when I was younger. I jumped a tramp steamer out of San Francisco and went to New Zealand and Australia when I was in my very early 20s. And I was constantly on the move. If I wasn't hitchhiking or jumping on railroad cars or flying off to some place, I was thinking about doing it. And as I got older and older, that travel bug began to sort of die out in me. The world is pretty similar all around when you get right down to it. People are pretty much the same the world around. Customs are different, languages are different, food is different. But in large part, I see more similarities than I see differences in the world. And so I stopped traveling. But my partner, who loves to travel, began dragging me off on these trips. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be dragged off on these trips, I should do something with it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do a travel book, one of those travel logs about visiting this country and that country and all these little interesting, picaresque adventures that we might have. And after so many years of traveling around, we wound up in Prague. And while we were in Prague, I got this idea for a novel where I could combine all of my travel and put it into a book maybe. That was the idea. Of course, the fleshing out the idea took considerably longer than that. But I was curious about, how we travel, why we travel. I've never had good answers for either one of those questions. And I also discovered while traveling that I have a number of demons in my life. I think we all do. And all of a sudden, I found those demons on the trip with me. And so I thought, well, let's put them in the book too. So it's just a hodgepodge of stuff that I was able to mold together into something that might make for a good story.
I want to return to those two themes of travel and demons, but I did want to focus on the story because your story really centers on two characters. The main character, of course, is Bird Mavrias, and also his wife, Mimi Bullshield. And they've been inspired. They've been inspired to go on a journey to Europe, basically trying to trace a long lost uncle. It's Mimi's uncle, Leroy Bullshield, who, about 100 years earlier had sent postcards from his travels in Europe to his family, and then basically disappears. And so I'm just curious as to if you can just tell us a little bit more about these characters, Bird and Mimi. Who are they?
Well, Bird is kind of an ex-journalist who has stopped doing journalism. He's really not doing much of anything at this point. Mimi is who is Mimi? I suppose. I mean, the characters in part are based on myself and my partner. I don't think that's any secret, or won't be a secret for very long. Mimi really, what I know about Mimi is she likes to travel. She likes to see the world. And she uses those postcards that Leroy Bullshield had sent home from his travels with a Wild West show. She uses those as the excuse to travel. I don't think she really has any strong hope that she's ever going to find out what happened to Uncle Leroy, but those 10 postcards become her tickets, as it were, to various places in the world. Mimi and Bird are, in many ways, a set of middle-aged native characters, not the kinds of characters that you normally see in fiction. They're reasonably well off. They have money to travel. They've had good jobs in their lifetime. I wanted to make them, I suppose, ordinary in many ways. The fact that they're native is an important part of who they are, but it's not the only thing that they are.
You alluded to the fact that when you were younger, you had this kind of wanderlust, and that you were constantly on the move, and how that desire to travel has waned in the ensuing years. And at the beginning, like fairly early on in Indians on Vacation, Bird makes the statement. He says, "I'm not sure why we travel." And then he also says, "I have this recurring expectation that when we go to fascinating places, we'll be surprised and amazed by what we find. It's a misconception, of course." Yeah. He seems to have this kind of deep-set disdain for the kind of desire that people have constantly to be seeing new things and going to exotic places. Why is he so down on travel?
I think probably he's so down on travel is that those expectations that you're going to see something new and something spectacular and something interesting generally don't come about. In the world of travel today, what you have are tourist centers in most of the places that people travel to. And in those tourist centers, what they've done is they've tried to recreate North American or European culture for you. And so you really don't get a new experience. You really don't you aren't surprised. If you do any travel at all, after a while, that element of surprise and delight is gone. Sure, there's interesting architecture, but quite frankly, if I see another cathedral, I'm going to scream. Um, you get to eat some interesting food, some local favorites, as it were. But for the most part, you can always find a pizza in any parts of the world, and and if you go off the beaten track, I know people are going to say, well, why don't you go off the beaten track? Why do you go to all these places like Prague and Amsterdam and Paris and Berlin, blah, blah, blah? Why don't you go to some really interesting places where civilization as we know it, as Westerners know it, has not taken over? That's hard to find, number one. And if you do go to those places, they're kind of scary because all of a sudden now you don't know where you are. And so you have those two choices. You can either go to the standard kind of, I don't want to call it a Disneyland kind of vacation, but it sort of reminds me of that. Or you can go to some place that's completely off the map, where you have absolutely no idea what's happening. The one is familiar, and the other, quite frankly, is probably scary. So why do we travel?
I was wondering, though, if Bird was also saying, though, that we're not recognizing that there's so much to explore and discover in our own backyards, in our own gardens, and that really what we need to be doing is we need to be mining our own interior selves and not be so beholden or so enamored with the external.
Well, certainly that's part of it. This idea that you have to go someplace else to really have a great time and to see, new and exotic things. One of the things that the pandemic has done is it's forced Helen and myself to look around here in Southern Ontario to see where we can go, get outdoors someplace. And so what we've done is every so often we'll find a spot we'd never thought of going to, and we'll go there. And frankly, we find that kind of travel just as enjoyable, at least I do, as flying off to Europe or South America or Australia, New Zealand. And we speak the language. So, that's a benefit. We were just down in San Miguel Allende. My Spanish is not very good. And not having the language for going to various places is a real detriment. North Americans don't tend to be multilingual, and so we get caught up in that. But yeah, staying right here and looking around at what you have and what you can do and the sort of exotic places. The joke always was when I was living out in Lethbridge, Alberta, a joke was that as we were thinking about flying off to Europe to see the French Alps, for instance, or any of a variety of places, Europeans were flying to Alberta to see the Rockies and to see Lake Louise and Banff. And so it was sort of an exchange program, I suppose, of travelers. They saw that as rugged, magnificent, just wonderful panoramas while we were flying off into Paris to have espresso beneath the Eiffel Tower. So it's just, I think part of travel is that you want to think that you're going to some place that is not your own backyard, but in actual fact, your own backyard has a lot to offer. At least I think so.
And yet at the same time, we're living in a time of increasing populism around the world, increasing nativism, increasing xenophobia, where it seems as if walls are being erected, whether it's on the U.S.-Mexico border or whether it's in places like Hungary around the world. And I'm wondering at this moment whether we should not be, if we're trying to kind of realize this more human world, should we not be promoting more travel, promoting more connection?
I don't know that travel makes us more tolerant. My suspicion is that it doesn't. I think, horribly enough, it allows us to to look around and say, hey, the suspicion I had that we were superior is correct. I don't know that it makes us more interested in other people. I mean, certainly, if I look around the world at the politics and what's happened in the world, I'd have to say that travel hasn't done any of that, because we travel more, at least we did before the pandemic. We were traveling more than we ever had. The world was small. We could get to any place in 12 hours, 13 hours. Has it made us more tolerant? Has it decreased the incident of war, of xenophobia? No, so far as I can tell, it is not. We're just as racist and nasty and frightened as we were before we got on planes and went around the world. I'm not sure why that is. I'm just looking at, travel was up, and so was, what's the word I want? Missing my words today. Dead airspace. Well, I'll think of it after the interview's over, and I'll say, I should have said that.
Yeah, and yet there's a subversiveness, though, about your title, the title you chose, Indians on Vacation, because in the popular imagination, in the mainstream,
we don't go on vacation.
People don't imagine indigenous people going on vacation, and so you're challenging that notion, are you not, with the title?
Well, I'm challenging that notion. I'm also it's a little bit of a not a joke, but just a little bit of play. Indians on vacation. If I had said Indians on horseback, nobody would have said, they said, oh, yeah, right. Right. But Indians on vacation, so what? But we do. I mean, once again, one of the problems is that people, when you say Indian, people still see, that guy with feathers on a horseback. I was tempted to wear my phony baloney headdress for the show today, but my partner stopped me and said, not a good idea. Mm-hmm. But yeah, nobody thinks of Indians on vacation. So maybe people will buy the book just to find out what we do on vacation. And I won't give away the answer.
No.
We're very different from anybody else.
Indeed. A lot like black folks.
Yeah, exactly. Black folks on vacation. Do they do?
Imagine that. What a concept. What a concept.
Completely frightening.
You mentioned some of the demons that you have struggled with, and Bird at one point, again fairly early on in the novel, he says, lots of people have demons. I know I do. And my approach to dealing with it is to pretend that they don't exist, to leave them tucked away in the darkness. What's the price that Bird pays for pretending that his demons don't exist?
Well, he pays the price all of us pay by thinking those demons don't exist. And that is that we can ignore them, and Bird ignores them for as long as he can. But then when they appear, they're pretty tough, and they hit pretty hard. And you know what happens with Bird in the novel with the demons. They get conjured up, and suddenly there they are in Prague with the poor man. And I think that's what happens with this. We tuck them away for a while, and then they come out, and we have to deal with them. And I think the more we tuck them away, they're stronger when they appear, and they're harder to get rid of, especially as you get older.
His partner, though, Mimi, has a particular strategy, or she seems to have a philosophy of how to deal with these demons, in that she names them. So each of these demons, what does the naming of these demons do?
Well, I think the naming of the demons really puts a face to them. I think a lot of times those demons that we all live with are more powerful because they have no names. They're sort of omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, if you will, a kind of pseudo-God in our lives. And by naming them, now she's individualized them, and you can see them as individuals, and you can deal with them as individuals. And so while Mimi is helpful in naming the demons, the bad thing is that when she names them, they come into being, as it were. And so now you can't tuck them away. You can't keep them hidden. There they are, and you have to deal with them. Is that good? I don't know.
What
I don't know if Bird knows.
does Mimi have demons?
Well, yeah, sure she does, but we don't hear about Mimi's demons, do we? And I suppose Mimi can pretend that she doesn't have demons. And one batch of demons at a time, for pity's sake. I don't know if I could deal with Bird's demons and Mimi's demons in a book. I'd have to do a sequel. Indians on Vacation Redux.
You've talked about how you grew up with women. You grew up with a lot of female storytellers.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what that kind of exposure to female storytellers as a young person, how that helped to even inform this book, and how it helped to inform even the way in which you write about a character like Mimi.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose it might have given me more insight into female characters. I'm not going to claim that, but it could be true. I know that the men in my life early on were far and few between, and none of them was a storyteller. The storytellers were the women in the family. And so I suppose in part I have some of my storytelling techniques from that base. I know that my mother and grandmother liked to tell stories. There were friends in the neighborhood, women, who also told stories. I don't know if there were any techniques that they used that I employed. I can't remember back that far. I can just remember some of the stories and some of the ways in which they were told.
What were the qualities of their storytelling, Thomas? What were the kind of core elements of the stories? The way in which they told
from my stories?
No, from the women, from those women storytellers.
Oh, from the women.
Yeah.
Most of the stories were told at angles. So you didn't say, Bob's beating his wife, and he's taken her car keys, and he doesn't let her leave the house. That would be a very direct way of telling a story, without much of anything. Most of the stories that I heard, or let's call it neighborhood gossip, that was turned into stories. What you do is you take the elements and you would soften them, and you would take them at an angle rather than head on. And so the story might start off that, did you see Bob down at the supermarket? He's having a hard time right now. They'd sneak up on it. Nothing direct, nothing sort of in your face. They'd even circle around a couple of times. And that's true of native storytellers that I heard as a young man, too. Nothing direct, everything at angles. It's almost a way of hunting, if you will. If you watch animals hunt, they tend to slide out of the field of vision of whatever they're after. They'll circle around. They're cautious about it. They're cautious storytellers, if you will. And I like that approach. I'm not much for rushing in with fire hose and axe. I'd rather sit back and just take my time circling a story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What when you think about, for example, your grandmother and your mother, do you think that having that exposure to the storytelling helped you to become a better listener? And I say that because your ear for you seem to have a real ear for dialogue.
Yeah.
I was showing my sister, who hasn't read a book of yours before. I was showing my sister your book the other day, and she read about 2 pages, and she said the dialogue is marvelous. You know, she hadn't read something as vibrant in terms of the dialogue that you capture in a long time. And I was wondering, you know, why you think you seem to have a particular gift for capturing dialogue. Is it because you were such a listener as a young person?
I don't know. I mean, dialogue, I wish I could tell you where that came from, but I love dialogue. I just love hearing the way people talk and the kinds of things you can do with dialogue, the things you can suggest. Uh, we're not very direct animals. We're always talking in metaphors and we're always talking about, you know, at one remove from what we want to say. Uh, and I delight in that. I guess I hear it. Maybe I hear it clearer than other people do. I don't know. But dialogue certainly is one of the things that I have to have. I'm just finishing up another novel in which the main character doesn't speak ever. And I thought I'd set myself that task to see if I could write a novel with one hand tied behind me, where I've got a character who never says a word in the book. And how are you going to do that? So, but I did, and I still use dialogue, but it's other people's dialogue. So we'll see how that turns out.
One of the most powerful characters in the irrepressible characters in your book is Mimi's mother, Bernie.
Oh yeah,
You know, and very, very kind of charismatic individual. And she has a lot of things to say. She has a lot of stories to tell. And she has this notion of authenticity. She says authentic is overdone. Authentic is one of the ideas whites use to hold us in place. It's one of the ways we hold ourselves in place. And I was particularly struck by that last line. It's one of the ways in which we hold ourselves in place. What was she getting at? What was Bernie trying to say?
Well, this comes probably in days at University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and I was the advisor for Indian students on that campus. And this was the time American Indian movement, Black Power movement, most of the ethnic movements were going on strong, 60s, 70s. And one of the things that I ran into was that if you were an Indian at that period, you had to look like one. You had to act like one. And most of us on campuses had no idea what that meant. We knew what Indians looked like in movies and on television, and we knew how they acted in movies and television, but there really wasn't a pan-Indian model that we could play with, except for that authentic Indian, and I use authentic in parentheses. And I think still today there is that kind of notion that we have to measure ourselves against that 19th century image. And it's a killer. It really is a killer. And yet at the same time, it's what non-Indians want to see. It's still what non-Indians expect. And unfortunately, because of that, it's sort of what we expect of ourselves too. And it's a hard thing to get away from sometimes. I'm not saying that we run around and slap on leathers and beaded buckles and feathers whenever we get out into public. I'm just saying in the back of our minds, there is that image against which we measure ourselves. So when the weather turns kind of humid and my hair gets kind of curly, I think to myself, oh, hell, I don't look very native now, do I? I look more Greek. And just that idea, just that thought is kind of a silly thing to have, but there it is. There it is. I don't know what it's like for other peoples. But for Native people, I think we have that.
Well, it's potentially very debilitating, is it
Yeah,
not?
it is.
And I'm wondering how you have managed to deal with that, because it's almost as if you're dealing with that gaze. I guess they call it the white gaze, which is always on you, constantly evaluating you, and you almost become your own prison guard.
Yeah, and I mean the white gaze is on me, but I also have my own gaze on me too. So it's sort of a double whammy. Yeah, I don't know that I do manage it. I mean, I think like the demons, I keep it under control. I know it's there. I suppose I could have made that one of the demons as well in the book.
So are you
but
performing? Are you performing then?
Sure. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, the horrible thing is whenever I get out of the house and I have to do a public event, I'm performing. It's very exhausting. So if I have to go to, let's say, the Ottawa Book Festival, or go out to Vancouver Book Festival, or wherever, the minute I leave the house, when I put my hat on and grab my suitcase, I'm in performance mode. I'm on stage, as far as I'm concerned.
But what does it mean, though? What does it mean to have to perform? And I'm going to return to this notion of authenticity, what Bernie was talking about. Who, and I'm not a psychoanalyst, but you know, who is Thomas King when he's not performing?
Pretty dull and reasonably happy. When he's performing, he's uptight and concerned. I don't know. I mean, what happens is it's not as though I become somebody else. It is, I suddenly know that everything I do, everything I say, every movement I make is being watched, even if it isn't. And I have to try to conduct myself in a particular fashion, whereas when I'm at home, I don't. I just, I'm just me. But once I leave the house, it's hard to explain. It's like stepping on stage. It's like being backstage, in your dressing room and just having a good time or a bad time, and then you have to perform.
I can really relate to your story because as a young person, I was a huge hockey fan, and I loved to play. I loved to play hockey. I was a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, and then at a certain point, I think it was around grade 9, I thought that as a black kid growing up in Ottawa, to be authentically black, I had to start playing basketball. And so I stopped playing. So I literally stopped playing hockey. I stopped playing the sport that I loved because somehow, I was dealing with my own demons, but I felt as if by playing hockey, I was losing my blackness somehow.
Were you any good at basketball?
No. I played. We had a good team, and I was okay. But I enjoyed hockey more, and I felt this kind of internal pressure, I suppose, to play basketball because then I would be more black in this kind of majority white environment. And I'm wondering, for you, do you struggle with your own sense of authenticity as an Indigenous person?
Well, I always have. I mean, my mother's Greek, my father's Cherokee. So right there, I've got this split, if you will. Most of the time, it doesn't bother me one little bit. I sort of like having those two camps that I can play around in. Sometimes it's a bother, but primarily it's a bother for someone else. So people will say to me, well, you're not as authentic a writer as, and then you fill in the blank, because you're not full blood. You don't speak your language. You weren't raised on a reserve. These were the kinds of things that we used to beat ourselves up about back in the 60s and the 70s, and it's still there. And I've had black friends over the years who have told me the same thing, that this notion of who is the authentic black as opposed to these these sort of, I don't know what you'd say, this long line of different pieces of blackness, and then where on that continuum do you fall? And that's the same thing for Native people. I've got Native friends who are more authentic than I am, authentic quote than I am. I have friends who are less authentic than I am, Native friends who are less authentic than I am. In the end, I really don't know what to do with any of that, and so I try to ignore it as best I can. And normally, it's not brought up so much within the Native community anymore. It used to be, but now it's not. But the non-Native community still sort of asks the question every so often.
What do you think's changed?
On book tours.
What do you think's changed in the Native community?
I think in Canada, at least, the Native community in Canada is much more encompassing. I think we've gotten over the notion of authentic Indians and inauthentic Indians. We still have status Indians, non-status Indians, but that doesn't seem to be as big an issue as it was earlier on. And especially in the arts, this is where you really see the division, I think, especially in the arts, where everybody is scrambling for that position of being the Black writer, the Native writer, the Latino writer. I don't feel that that's as big an issue within the Native literary community, the Native artistic community, as it is down in the States, for instance. I think it's more, a little bit more of a Wild West down there, with everybody wanting to be the big whatever on campus. So I think we're a little bit more generous with ourselves up here. Certainly that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Mimi and Bird have different approaches when it comes to describing who they are. Mimi is quite adamant about identifying herself as Blackfoot, so that when she's asked where she's from, she says Blackfoot. Whereas with Bird, he will often identify the geographical location. He'll refer to Guelph. Or the place. How do you explain that kind of division between the two of them?
Well, I mean, Mimi as a character is much fiercer about that sense of identity, that sense of where she's from, and certainly for her, that notion is firmly fixed in Alberta on the reserve. I mean, there is no other kind of identity that she has. Whereas Bird has a number of identities, actually, or parts of identities. And so he's a little bit looser with that. And rather than be adamant, Bird as a character becomes conciliatory, if you will. Whereas Mimi is not. Mimi is not going to be generous about that question. Mimi's stance comes in part from a short story I wrote years ago called Borders, where a mother and her son go down to the States to visit the boy's sister. And when they get to the border, the U.S. border, and they ask the mother for her citizenship, she says Blackfoot. And the border guard says, you got to be U.S. or Canadian. And she insists on Blackfoot. And so they get stuck in a duty-free parking lot because they can't go into the States when they try to Canada. And she tells them Blackfoot there. They won't let her in. So they won't let her in, won't let her out. She's stuck in the parking lot. So Mimi is, I suppose, the latter-day incarnation of that impulse.
Is Mimi braver than Bird?
She's fiercer. Is she braver? Never thought of her in those terms. I think probably they're equally brave, although Bird is probably less able to manage his demons and his emotions than Mimi is. Mimi's the stronger of the two of them, for sure.
And more political.
And more political. Yeah. And Bird would like to be more political, but he's not. Well, that's one of the
In a previous interview, Thomas, you said that you see yourself as an intellectual activist, but you said, "quote I don't like my ass being on the line," and you kind of referred to yourself as a bit of a chicken shit.
Yeah.
Now, you are an activist.
Not early on. Early on, I was fierce.
Well,
I was fierce.
Yeah, because you said that and I know that you were part of the American Indian movement. But you said that you got scared shitless a number of times, both by the activists and by the police. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Well, it was just an easy thing. I mean, you think that you're going to be, a brave, be a warrior. You think that you're going to be able to stand up, et cetera, and you don't know what's going to happen until sort of the shit hits the fan. And I got into a couple of situations where things got really Western, as we say out in the West, and I held up okay, but it scared the hell out of me. And I thought to myself, what am I doing here? This isn't comfortable, and it's not supposed to be comfortable. But I didn't like it much, and I thought there's got to be some way that I can do much the same thing without having a gun stuck in my face.
Was it your mortality? Was it that's what you were scared about? Like, what were you scared about?
I don't know if it's mortality or just being shot. In part, I think it was the ludicrousness of the situation where here is this guy who's getting paid as a cop, who's got a gun, who's got a license to use it, who might well use it with impunity. And I thought to myself, this is a crazy world. This shouldn't be happening. And yet here I am in the middle of it. It was sort of like a Fellini movie where you sort of can't figure out what's happening, but you're in it. And I thought to myself, I would like more control over this situation than I have. Partly that's what it was. I had sort of lost control over my life and over the situation, and I didn't much care for that. And so as a writer, I can hide away at home, and I can do all of my activism in my writing. And I like that. Now, somebody can say, well, that's easy for you to be nice and safe in your house while other people are out on the front lines. And I agree. It is. But it's what I'm good at. And sort of like you and hockey and basketball. I wasn't good at the frontline activism. I was better at this. So, did you ever go back to hockey?
Now I play. I play a bit now, and I enjoy basketball, and I actually love I love both sports, but I preferred hockey. I love Daryl Sittler, number 27. But I wasn't that good.
I was 6'6" when I was in first year high school. Let me just change this. And so I got dragged out to the basketball court because I was the tallest kid at school. And I was horrible at basketball. I mean, just terrible. And I wanted to be good at basketball because people say, oh, you're so tall, you make a great center. 6'6". Nowadays, 6'6" is a short guard.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, I could see a career for myself. And it was dreadful.
I want to talk a little bit about stories and the function that stories play, because that's been a kind of an ongoing theme throughout your writing career. Of course, your 2003 Massey lectures was centered on the idea of story.
Yep.
And at one point in your book, Bird says, "Truth be told, we make up stories for all sorts of reasons: to protect ourselves, to feel superior, to deflect blame, to turn disaster into advantage, for no better reason than that we can." You've been telling stories for a very long time. You've been listening to stories since you were a little boy, listening to those female storytellers, those women storytellers that you were surrounded by. How has your understanding of the role that stories play, or that story plays, evolved over the years?
Oddly enough, I sort of understood the power of stories early on. And so it hasn't changed a whole lot. What's changed is my understanding of how to hone a story and make it as powerful as you possibly can. So that really is what's changed. Is that I think I've gotten better and better at telling stories, how to tell a story, the pacing, the narrative style, the dialogue. I think slowly I've sort of shed some artifices that I've had on storytelling, and it's gotten leaner and cleaner. That really is it. I've always thought of stories as powerful. I've always known that they could change things. My great sadness in life is that the stories that I've told haven't changed as much as I would hope it would. I mean, storytellers hope they're going to change the world, quite frankly. I think we have that idea in mind that our stories are going to make a difference and not simply be entertainment. But by and large, it appears we are entertainment. I don't know how to get around that. That's the thing. That's the next step on storytelling that I'm trying to figure out, is how to make a story irresistible, how to give it some kind of weight so that it actually makes a change in the world. I look around the world and I say, oh my God, if this is the effect that storytelling has had on the world, then we're not very good storytellers, or the stories aren't as powerful as we thought.
But surely these stories have an impact on the discourse, and we're living in a moment where, and you've talked about this kind of native Indigenous Renaissance. We're living in a moment of incredible production by Indigenous storytellers who are winning wide acclaim, critical acclaim for the quality of the work and the power of these stories. Surely these stories are changing the discourse, changing the narrative? No?
I don't know that they are. I mean, certainly they're being appreciated. They're having a wonderful moment in the literary light on the literary stage. There are a great many new Native writers that have come along in the last 5, 6, 7 years who are just terrific. And that's very pleasing. Have they changed the discourse? They've kept the discourse going, and it's an ongoing discourse. But in terms of federal policy towards Native people, for example, I don't see a whole lot of change there. The problem with public perception and, say, the police and Native people, I don't see a lot of changes there. I hear a lot of talk about it, but I don't know that that's changed. In the same way that, I mean, you've got blacks writing in great numbers, wonderful stories, and has that changed the way in which police deal with black people? I don't know that it has particularly.
Why not?
It's a bother.
Why haven't these stories change things?
I don't know. I don't know. I wish I did. If I did, I would change my storytelling techniques and fix it so that they would change something. That's one of the great sorrows in my life, is that I haven't been able to change more with my stories than I had hoped to change. But I think a lot of storytellers who are concerned about what's happening in the world, I think they tell you the same thing. I know I get letters from people and emails that say you've changed my life, but it's the world that I'm after.
Well, what then are some of the stories that Canadians need to disabuse themselves of? I suppose what I'm asking is, what are Canadians have told stories about themselves for a very long
Yeah.
time that might not be true. and so I'm wondering, what are those stories that Canadians need to shed, that Canadians need to dispense with, and what are the new stories that need to be formed?
I would turn it around. I would say that what Canadians need to do is to look at the old stories that they've told about themselves and re-up those. At one point, Canadians were known for their politeness, their generosity, their concern with what was happening in the world, with the environment. And when I first came to Canada, one of the things that just absolutely delighted me was here was a country that shared many of my beliefs, and it was a liberal country that was concerned with the social good, with social programs, with trying to find a way to bring peace to the world. I mean, these were all things that sort of Canadians had as part of who they were. I think many of those have slipped away. And I'd like to see us go back to some of those and see if we couldn't, make ourselves a little bit more open. Uh, it as I look at the politics just as a bellwether, for instance, we have moved much more to the right, much more past conservatism into another area, and that bothers me a great deal. It just seems as though the political parties are on this little slippery slope and sliding right down.
What are some
And you can
examples
see what's at the bottom.
what are some of those examples of conservatism that you see seeping into the Canadian milieu?
Well, boy, that might be hard to actually pinpoint since you put me on the spot and I haven't had a chance to do my homework on it. I suppose if I did the research, I could come up with A, B, C, D, and give you all sorts of examples. Uh, I suppose the example I'd have to give is that I never, in all my years of being alive, 77 years, thought that in North America we would ever see someone in power the way that the President of the United States is in power, that kind of a character. He's out of a very bad novel, as far as I'm concerned. How did that happen? How did And that's not Canada. I know you're gonna say that's the U.S. That's not Canada, but frankly, we're all in the same pot here in North America. There's I don't know. I'm gonna blow the question because I can't look at it. It's just a feeling I have that we just keep moving. We get less. We've become less generous. I'll give you for instance. In Canada, there's no reason that we couldn't have had free education. We've got not free medication, not free medical services. As a matter of fact, we're losing those. All of a sudden now we have private hospitals, private clinics that are in place, private, what do they call them? Not rest homes, but private care centers. Many of those things, as far as I'm concerned, should be public. We've sold a lot of our public assets off over the years. So we'll do something like build a highway and then we'll sell it to a public corporation. At least half of Canada Post is private at this point. We pour public money into corporations, which is, as far as I'm concerned, crazy as hell. Public money is needed for public programs and should be used in public programs. And yet we give billions away to corporations for no better reasons except that they want it. And they've been able to negotiate through our political system, negotiate getting that in terms of tax breaks and grants, et cetera, et cetera. And so the public sector has gone begging over the years. And that's gotten worse, I think. Education, our classrooms are overcrowded. They're going to open them up now with the pandemic still bubbling away, and it doesn't look as though they're going to knock the numbers down in the classroom. So these things, they're all little bits and pieces that sort of come together in my head to say that we're not being very smart with how we manage ourselves. We think that money is the be all and the end all, and the more we think that, the worse it's going to get for people who don't have a whole heck of a lot. I mean, billionaires, to my way of thinking, are an indication that the society has gone off the rails. I don't, just I can't imagine what you do as a billionaire. I really can't. How many things can you buy? How many yachts can you purchase? How many planes can you put in a hangar while other people are going hungry? And, it's crazy. It's gotten kind of crazier. I suppose that would be my long-winded way of answering that question. Sorry.
No, not at all. Well, since the conversation has entered the political realm a bit, I'm going to push it a bit further because last night the former U.S. President Barack Obama delivered an extraordinary address at the Democratic National Convention in which he lambasted his successor, Donald Trump. He said that Trump was not fit for the office of the presidency.
He's not.
And you've been in Canada for many decades now, but you were born in Sacramento, California in the 1940s. You're an American citizen as well. And Barack Obama last night basically said that he felt that the U.S. democracy was in peril, and that if Donald Trump were not booted out of office in the November election, that the U.S. Republic would be in danger. And I'm wondering, as someone with ties both, in the United States, what did you make of what Obama had to say? And given the experiences that Native Americans have had in the country, in which the democracy has never really represented them.
No.
What should we make of his dire, his kind of apocalyptic presentation of where the country is right now?
Oh, he's about 20 years late with that prediction, I think. I lived half my life in the U.S., half my life in Canada. So I've been here since 1980. And so I've had a chance to look at both countries. I know the political system in both countries at this point. And I think it really began to go off the rails in the U.S. with people like Ronald Reagan. And I don't think it's recovered. And Obama made a wonderful speech, but at the same time, he was in many ways a great disappointment. He seemed to have been caught up by the same monster that bred Donald Trump. Is the U.S. going to be saved by Joe Biden getting into office? I doubt it. Biden is cut out of the same cloth as Trump is. The problem with Trump is that he's got this mouth on a hinge. And so he says those things that weren't said before. He gives an element of society carte blanche to do what they've always wanted to do. So the racists in the U.S. have been emboldened by someone like Donald Trump. But it doesn't mean that was dead before he got into office. Now, what's going to happen if he gets in for another 4 years? Well, I've got lots of friends who may actually try to get into Canada. I suspect the border is going to be pretty busy. I can't imagine another 4 years of that clown in office. But I couldn't imagine that he'd ever get elected in the first place. I'm still recovering from that. And it's not that I think right-wing politics is the Antichrist. It's just that I just never thought it would go that far to put someone like that in that position of power. Now, could that happen here in Canada? Oh, yeah, it absolutely could. It could. Will it? I hope not. But I don't see our politicians really making the kinds of hard and necessary decisions that they need to make. It feels like a corporation is running the country rather than uh, a republic. So, but I tend to be grumpy, and people can certainly dismiss me for having opinions that are I don't know, not theirs. And that goes the same way. My opinion. I don't share their opinions either. Um, I'd like to see us be a much more social country.
In 11 days from now, one of this country's most celebrated documentary makers, most prolific as well, is turning 88 years old. Alanis Abomsawin is turning 88 on the 31st.
Is she 88?
She's turning 88 on the 31st of August. And she just last year produced another documentary. We know that Bob Dylan, and at the age of 79, has produced one of his most highly acclaimed albums in decades. You know, you are a relative spring chicken when compared to Alanis Abomsawin or Bob Dylan. You turned 77 this year.
How old's Bob?
Bob's 79. So he's
79.
He's 79 years old. But you two are incredibly and continue to be incredibly productive. You know, producing novel after novel, all kinds of work. How do you explain your productivity?
Well,
in this chapter of your life.
I can't dance. I can't play basketball.
Can't play basketball.
So
that's the next chapter. There's still time.
Yeah,
there's still time.
The only thing I do is I go canoeing of a night every night on the Speed River, and that's when they let me out. The rest of the time, I'm here with the refrigerator, my espresso machine, and my computer. And because I've got nothing better to do, I write. My mother's 98, so she really sees me as a spring chicken. And I didn't know Alanis was 88. Happy birthday to her. Wow, that's great. That's great. And I'm surprised Dylan made it to 79, to be honest with you. But then again, Keith Richards is still alive, too.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
I don't know how old he is.
Yeah.
And
but what's your secret, though? What's your secret, Thomas? Because it's quite remarkable. You know, people 30, 40 years younger than you are could only wish to be as productive as you are at this stage. And I'm wondering, what's your secret? What's your approach? What's allowed you to keep the juices flowing?
Well, one of the major pieces in my literary life is my partner and the kind of environment that she's helped to create for me as a writer. She's a painter. And
Helen Hoy.
You know, Helen Hoy, yeah. And the two of us sort of understand that artistic nature. And so in our household, it's very quiet. It's, you know, there isn't a lot of things we have to try to handle of a day that make us anxious. I mean, we've got kids, and as kids go, they have problems from time to time, and grandkids that we can't even see now because of the pandemic. But I think really it's Helen's influence in my life. She keeps me from floating away. I'm sort of like a balloon on a string, and she sort of ties me down and keeps me stable. And it really is. It's a gift. If you can find someone in your life like that, it is an absolute gift because it gives me space. It gives me inspiration. It makes me feel good about myself. And so, and I write in part. I mean, I used to say I write for, blah, 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 and I'd fill in the socially acceptable blanks. But in actual fact, I write for myself and I write for her. And so I'm like a puppy with a slipper. I write something and I run off and show it to her and say, "What do you think about this? Oh, this is pretty good."
Yeah.
And she'll say, "Yeah, you need to work on it some more, but it's okay." So that's an important part of it. And I tend to be the kind of person who just lives in my head, and that's genetics or that's environment. I don't know what that is. That's just me. So I don't need a lot of external stimulation. I don't need to be on stage. I don't need to be in front of the public particularly. I really prefer just to write, just think of what kind of stories I can tell to change the world, or at least to try to change the world. And so I just keep doing that because I'm not good at anything else. As we say, I can't play the horn, I can't play basketball, I can't sing, can't dance.
Yeah.
I just watched a video of Jerry Lewis in Cinderfella and that big dance scene that he does there, and I'm going, wow, geez, that guy was talented. He might have been taken as a bit of a fool in some of the roles he played, but he could dance, he could do all this stuff, and all I can do is write. So then I go back and I write.
Well, we're grateful for that because you don't just write, but you write very well. And then I'd like to thank you for gifting us. You talked about Helen being a gift to you, but thank you for gifting us with this conversation today. Really appreciate it, and it was a delight speaking with you. So Thomas King, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.